Today, Jourdan Ziff joins me. He's played in 5 different countries, and we're going to talk about all of those countries today. So many goals. She's a striker. Jourdan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, do you want to start us off then with what it was like growing up in California, and I'm supposing playing football when you were younger as well?
Yeah, so I grew up, born and raised in Southern California, called Temecula, a little bit outside of Los Angeles. And I loved playing any sport here. I played a few different sports, but really stuck to soccer. And it was a great area for soccer. I mean, California has such a high talent of pool of players here. So I loved it.
And obviously, growing up, who got you into football? And I know you got a sister, right? But did she ever like football?
Yeah, she did. We actually both played together. She's almost 2 years older than me. We were only one grade apart. So we both played locally. And she decided to stop when she was in high school because she decided to focus more on running, became a very elite runner. And I stuck with soccer. And yeah, but we played for the same club. And then we're only one grade apart in school. So we're able to share the field a few times.
So, when you shared the field for the first time, do you remember that feel? Like, how young were you when you started to get into the game?
Yeah, I was super young. I kind of was thrown out on the field at 4. And I think my parents were like, as long as they love it, they can do it. And if you do love it, they still, had high expectations for us, but really wanted it to be our choice, really to pursue our own passions. And started in what we call like rec leagues here. And then by 8 years old, I had joined a club team. And once you're doing club, it starts to become a higher level and more competitive. So it's nice to start that at that young age.
What's it like in America then, for those who may not know, in terms of a football perspective? I spoke to, it was Hamid Babali, but I spoke to loads of people who have been to America and are American, and they always tell me the facilities in America are world class. So could you guide us through then what it was like to play at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in those facilities? Were you in those facilities that they'd probably be talking about?
No, so I think when you're that young, we still have a good amount of fields here in California. I think also because there is such a high amount of people that decide to pursue soccer in California, especially at the younger ages. So I was lucky enough to still have great fields to play on, but in terms of facilities, I wasn't necessarily introduced to those until I went and played collegiately in university. But before university, our high school stadiums too, though, were pretty nice. So I guess, yeah, compared to what other people might experience, the field setting was still pretty a good level.
So do you think then, coming into the game at that young age, do you think it's like pretty easy for you? Because I know in England you could play football, I mean, until kind of the day you die, really, as your bones can cope. But, how easy is it for you as that young player to get into the game, not as a professional, but just, playing with your friends and then maybe later down the line being a professional?
Yeah, I think for me, because I decided to play a little more local, it ended up being what my whole community was. So many of my friends played too. And I think that really generated a love for the game. And that really propelled me to take it further because I think people who don't really love it or maybe get really competitive, really young, get a little bit burnt out. So I didn't really experience that as much. So it really laid the foundation to grow such a love for the game, which kind of I always check back into as I made each next step.
You mentioned there about getting burnt out, and I know here in England the Premier League academies are all the academies, but especially the Premier League ones, hammer down the children so hard, so young, and by the time they're 16, 17, 18, not all of them, but some of them fall out with the game, and the majority of them don't go on to be a professional. But do you think, looking at the comparison, is in America, is it as tough as that? And also, what is better? Do you like a player to be structured into a system, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a tough balance because that developing young is super important in order to get where you want to go because you still are going to pursue either a collegiate level in America or a professional level when you're still a teenager and then in your young 20s. So it definitely is a balance between both. I would say we're starting to build more of a culture where they're drilling into kids even younger, even in this Western, side of football in the United States and even in California. And I would say that can be a little bit of a slippery slope in terms of what you're pushing kids to do so young and that pathway of going pro really young. So I was a little bit at that sweet spot of an age where, getting your degree and going to college was still important and impressed upon you. But also, football ends up being the most important. So I think there's definitely a balance that you need to achieve, or else it's a pretty slippery slope.
I know a lot of people in the UK who go over to America to do that sort of internship scholarship thing where you study, but you also play football. I suppose near enough as a professional, basically on a professional schedule. In 2015, you were at so-called freshman year. Well, firstly, could you tell us what that is? Because I know in England we've never used the word
Yeah.
freshman ever.
Yeah, that's your first year of university. So that is like, before that, you're living at home, you're playing your sport, whether, your parents are driving you to practice or you're driving yourself, you're still in high school. And then you go to your freshman year of college, which is your first year and you're away.
So talk to us about that then, because I know that you played in the Patriot League Rookie. Is that what it was called? And was it twice a week?
Yeah. So actually, with the way college, I went to a Division I university, and so I was in my rookie year, which would be my
Okay.
freshman year. And so, if you get any sort of accolades, they might, be like you get Rookie of the Year, Rookie of the Week. But it was the Patriot League, and that was over on the East Coast. I played in Maryland, and so we would travel to New York or Boston, Massachusetts, or all kind of up and down the East Coast to compete in the Patriot League.
So I suppose then for the people that go to America or people like you that want to play football and study, do you sort of pick your university based on how good the football team is in that university?
Yeah, I would say that most of the time, if you are really pursuing your sport, I would say it's different for different people's goals. If you might be using your sport to get the highest level of education that you possibly can. So maybe you would choose a program that isn't as strong in soccer, but would get you like a phenomenal degree, but vice versa as well. I think that there are really big soccer schools and other schools that are known for their sport that people will be like, oh, I can get a degree at the same time, but I'll be playing at the top level Division I university that could maybe propel me even to future years of my sport playing professionally.
I've had to write some of these names down. So the next year was 2016. It's called the sophomore year.
Yes.
I've probably not said that right.
Yes.
Okay. What happens in that year? Is that any different?
So, sophomore year was pretty similar. It's kind of your first time where you don't feel like the newest person out there.
Okay.
So that makes a big difference, especially because that collegiate level, you really jump up in more of the physicality part of the game. Because before, when you're 16 years old, you're playing against 16-year-olds. Whereas I went to college young for my age. So I was 17 in that freshman year, first year of college, and I'm playing against 21, 22-year olds. So it jumps up. And so that sophomore year is nice because you've kind of understood that that's your first little shift in playing style and you're starting to get used to that. For me, collegiately was the first time we're introduced to the weight room. And so you're in your kind of second year going through, all right, starting to build more of a foundation in that as well.
So when you're going through the ranks, and obviously you were there for 3 years, you mentioned that you were just introduced to the weight room in the second year. What else was introduced to you? Because I know tactics, philosophies, different coaches coming in and out. What did they sort of implement on you as a player?
Yeah, I would say it definitely makes you all of a sudden really prioritize your sport because you're balancing your studies and you have tons of resources at the university level in college, and specifically I can speak to my university. We had phenomenal resources. I mean, we had our own stadium that was just men's and women's soccer and men's and women's lacrosse. A beautiful stadium. You have a full training room. You have a full weight room. You have an academic and athletic counselor to kind of help shape your schedule. So there's a lot in place for you to succeed. And that is very new to you because before at the club level, it's kind of all what you do for yourself, where all of a sudden there's a structure put in for you, but you're starting to compete wearing, representing something bigger, which I think is what happens in professional. But for the United States, that happens at that collegiate level.
So you mentioned the stadium there. I know in America the stadiums are just absolutely ridiculous for basically no reason at all. So how big was the stadium that you were at? And I suppose the facility wise as well. Obviously, a lot of teams have a weight room and have a gym and have things like that. But how good were they in terms of the comparison in America?
Yeah, I would say that I was at a particular university that had the higher end of quality of resources. And a lot of that was because my school was very known for lacrosse. We had kind of a nationally ranked lacrosse team. And due to soccer being able to use the same fields, we had that stadium. I don't remember the exact capacity of the stadium, but I would say it would be about like a 15,000, seat, like
Wow.
had the higher capacity level. And then they also, during my time there, put in a separate field with a whole dome, which we would call like a dome or a bubble. So that way in the winters we could train temperature controlled. And that was just for soccer and lacrosse. So I would say, yeah, we were pretty fortunate in that arena.
So in terms of the stadiums, 15, 16, 17,000, whatever it may have been, why are they so big? I mean, is it like you're filling the stadiums out? Are people coming to watch? But 15,000 for a university team blows my mind.
Yeah, I think blew my mind. I think that's one of the reasons why I couldn't not take the opportunity to go to this school. I mean, I went from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. It was the only school I was even looking at outside of California. But when I realized, wow, like these are the resources available. This is the investment going into this program. I think that showed a really good sign to me. But again, I would say like my sport, especially being on the women's side, really got to benefit off of the lacrosse, who was very well established in the area, and we would fill those stadiums for the lacrosse games. I can't say the women's soccer was drawing 15,000 when I was at university, but again, I think that setting that precedent that people are investing in sports and investing in this program really carried through to what we felt on the field.
So let's just pause in your career journey for a second. Obviously, you're mid-20s. So let's talk about the adjustment of the women's game. And obviously, you've been there to see the adjustment and how, I suppose, rapidly it's changed. So could you guide us through then your time at college/university and then moving into, playing in Brazil, playing for different countries before, going into too much depth? But how much has it changed and what has changed?
Yeah. For me, I mean, it's pretty wild because I know I'm young and I'm still, playing, but it has already been night and day, the change from when I was going to college versus right now, a few years into my professional career. And I mean, that's pretty wild. That's just a span of less than 10 years. So I would just say that even the way people are thinking about the game is so different even in high school. When I was in high school, I didn't think that it was a career opportunity for a woman to go professional. And now there's already women in the United States thinking that they'll skip college and go straight to professional. I mean, that's a huge societal shift in mindset around football in America.
And in terms of, obviously, in the UK as well, I know in the UK it was really boosted by England winning the Euros. In America, obviously, you're hosting the Men's World Cup in a few years' time. So infrastructure-wise as well, is it going to be able to cope? Because I know that there was some reports of, was it the pitches not being in brilliant condition somewhere in America?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that America still doesn't have that soul of football that a lot of these other countries in the world have. But they're building to it, and they're kind of building on it, maybe even a little bit on the later end, considering it's already caught so much more wind here. I mean, you have Inter Miami here now. You have, even the men's side growing, and now you have the women's side really starting to explode. So they're trying to catch up and not do anything too quickly because that's where they get into trouble. But yeah, there is still a lot to be done. But the investment is there, and so they'll make it happen. I mean, it's where the money is, and it's growing. So,
and I know with the MLS as well, they have something called an expansion rule or policy or something. Do you know what that is, and could you explain to us what that means
for the MLS, that for the men's side?
Yeah.
I'm actually not as familiar with the expansion side for the MLS.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for
Okay.
them growing like a second tier.
Oh, are they growing a second tier as well?
No, I'm asking you.
Oh no! Basically, so what I sort of gathered is, if you have the right requirements and funds, you can basically pay to get yourself into the MLS. It's called like the expansion policy, because I know Noah Abrahams, who's someone that I know over in America, is working with San Diego, who are now going to become a new MLS team. So in terms of the women's side as well, are they doing anything to expand the teams there?
Yeah. And I heard about that's huge that San Diego's going to get another soccer program, because even in California, for the amount of athletes we have here, it hasn't had the strong football teams and football clubs here. And they're usually some of the last ones to be implemented, even in the highest leagues in America, which is surprising to me considering the pool of players that come from California. But it's growing, and it's growing on the women's side as well. The Women's Professional League had their inaugural, they created a second league for women's professional football in the United States, and they just had their inaugural year, and they're starting to get some expansion teams for that as well. But I already know that even at that, we have 2 teams professional here in California for the NWSL, the highest level, but none here yet for the USL. And they're planning to expand, but it's also getting pushed a little farther. So it's interesting how long it takes for it to kind of grow more west.
So you just mentioned 2 leagues there, the NWSL and the USL. Is that right?
Yeah.
So could you tell us the difference between the two? Because am I right? It might sound very crazy. Am I right in saying they're both the first tiers? Is that right?
Yes, you are right.
Okay.
And I think maybe that is parallels a little bit the men's system here as well. You have the MLS and then you have the USL, and one is not above the other in terms of relegation and things like that, in terms of tiers. But the NWSL is, the first league to be professional here, and has already grown such a standing and has some of the best players in the world playing for it. So this is a new league, and in a way they are trying to compete with it and say that will have just as high of a level, but I think that will also take some time. So it's not looked at as equal, but technically they're not one above the other.
Okay, so essentially we might be entering a bit of more revolution in terms of the leagues and what they can do, because I'm going to bring back the MLS again.
Mhm.
I'm not even going to start to talk about fixtures and things like that, but I know they're kind of split into a Western
Yeah.
and Eastern, and then they play each other once, and then they play a rival or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
It's very weird, very crazy. To be in England when you only play a
Right.
team twice,
Yeah.
and then to hear about America is crazy. So go on then, back to your career. 2017, I can pronounce this one perfectly. The junior year, you were the co-captain and suffered a near career-ending injury.
Yeah, I did. Junior year was a definite kind of bump in the road in terms of my career. And your junior year is your 3rd year out of 4 years of college. So it's a very important year. And I had a complete midfoot rupture, which doctors would say in American football, it's more common, and it can end your career because of the acceleration that is required from that part of your body. So yeah, I was out for about 9 months, went through 2 surgeries, couldn't walk for like 10 weeks. So it was a really long one. And yeah, I kind of was just, again, the resources that you provided at that collegiate level was helpful because I had day in, day out physical therapy. But for me, it wasn't going to be the end of my football journey.
I mean, I had to look up the injury because I'd never actually heard of it before, and it's quite something. It's sort of like the plate of your. Well, could you explain it better? But from what I sort of gathered, it was like the plate of your foot sort of disconnects from your whole foot, basically.
Yeah. So, it's pretty uncommon. It's called a Liz Franck injury, and you have ligaments kind of connecting all your toes in the middle of your foot, and all of them can rupture, and sometimes then they plate it, or a few can rupture. I had a pretty decent rupture, and so then they stick a pin in through your foot and try to stabilize the whole thing, and then decide then to take the pin out. But I mean, you think of your foot, it's pretty bony. There's not much in there. So it's pretty intense for your body to go through.
I can imagine. I mean, I definitely wouldn't be able to go through that. So you went through something very, very strongly for sure. So 2018, then your senior year. I'm getting to pronounce these names pretty well until we move on to Finland, where the name seems absolutely impossible. But your last year, it was the senior year. Talk to us about that, because I believe you were at the academic. Is it honor roll as well?
Yeah. So, and you have different accolades you can get for your academic and athletic performance. And so I was really proud of my senior year, especially returning back to football after 9 months. And I was the co-captain again my senior year, and I was really present in that season. A lot of people question, well, when did you decide to go pro, and were you just always working towards that? And I think also when you go through a potentially career-ending injury, you're just focused on the next game, the next practice, where you're at right then. And your collegiate seasons are pretty short. They're like 3 months long. So my head was fully in that, and I was able to perform pretty well. And I think because a whole season was taken away from me, I knew towards the end of that season that I wanted to work towards playing professionally afterwards.
I mean, we didn't even talk about sort of the recovery that you had from that injury. So I suppose when you get told that you can go back and train again, and I suppose the end is near, how? Well, firstly, you were told you maybe not you might not be able to play football again, and then you were told you can go back to training in a few weeks. So how far apart were they?
Yeah. So the doctor warns you pretty early on. You might not be the same afterwards. I know that there's other severe surgeries that people experience that a lot, where they might not be the same player. And I think that's what they warn you about. So the progression is very slow and like painstakingly slow, where 1 week you're going from walking to jogging to then jogging to a faster jog. And then, I mean, there's months of that. And then there's months of, okay, now you get to kick the ball. Now you get to kick it a little further. So it was quite the progression, which is why I was so glad I was at university during that time with a pretty good medical staff, because they can really monitor that and push you through that every day. But yeah, it stands out to me because I had to retrain how to kick with that foot. And we talked about how I started playing so young. So you never kind of think that you're going to have to retrain your foot how to kick a ball when you're already at a decent level of soccer. So it took a while.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So Finland came up next in the following year. Mm-hmm. How did you get the move from a college team in America to then go to Finland?
Yeah, I had a great assistant coach at my college level. His name was Kevin Dempsey, and he was able to network for me a little, because I think even back then, we talk about the change in the game. I had no idea what it looked like to go pro, how you get there. You know, I'm in America. I don't know. I don't have contacts with people in Europe. I've never lived anywhere besides the United States. So he was able to really be a facilitator in that and open my eyes that it was doable, and connected me to a coach who was coaching out in Finland. And, you know, you start building that highlight tape, and kind of took a chance and did it on my own. I didn't use an agent for quite some time.
Wow, that must be something then. So you just went into the deep end like that?
Yep, I did. I actually graduated college. I had to wait until my graduation. The season in Finland had already started, so I'm kind of just waiting to graduate. And then the day I graduated, I woke up the next morning and flew to Finland.
And then going to Finland, then landing in Finland, the whole experience before you sign the contract, to go from literally coming right out of education to signing a professional contract. Well, what was it like to land in Finland and then go ahead to the club?
Yeah, and honestly, it was pretty jarring. I think you're not quite used to. I'd made a big move before. That probably helped me mentally be like, I can make another big move, but not into a different culture at the same time. And I was going to go live with a host family. And, you know, the English there is hit or miss. Some people speak amazing English and some speak no English. So it was my first real encounter with those language barriers and that culture shock. And it definitely took an adjustment, but I would say being in that team camaraderie is something that felt very normal to me. And that was very comforting.
Well, you scored 19 goals in 13 games, so the adjustment to Finland was, quite all right.
Yeah. And, I loved my experience there. I think for the first time, I got to experience a real different style of soccer. You hear about that European soccer and just how diverse it can be and how different the style can be. And it was really fun to go explore that. When I've been playing my whole life, it was like almost like playing a different version, but of the same game.
And what was the game like over there? Was it faster, slower, more tactics? What was involved in Finland compared to America?
Yeah, I would say it was, the collegiate level of America, I would say, is pretty physical and tactical. But Europe definitely pretty quickly is in Finland. I was starting to notice the technical differences and how they're trained versus how we're trained, just even in your basic practices or trainings. There were little flicks people were doing that seemed awfully normal to them that were very foreign to me. And I was like, all right, this is going to be different. So yeah, there were some pretty quick differences.
But the third tier of Finland, then, you were obviously a professional. So that's all professional in Finland.
Yeah. And I think also going over there and dealing with the visas and stuff, they try to make it work any way they can. And I loved the team that I was put on. And it was the coach really wanted to give me every opportunity. And halfway through that season, I was actually borrowed by PK Vanta, another team who was in a higher tier when I was there, because they were going to go represent Finland in the Champions League. So I was pretty excited for that. Unfortunately, we had a coaching switch, and he didn't agree with that decision, letting a couple players go and do that. So I wasn't able to experience that, but I still was able to experience a diverse level because I was playing with a few different teams when I was even there.
I suppose then, I mean, you just mentioned the Champions League. Would you rather play in America or would you rather play in Europe with the Champions League and things like that?
Yeah, that is a tough question because I think, you know, part of me after playing so many places in the world wants to experience that the game here at that level. However, there is something very special playing where everyone in the country, it's their main sport. And I experienced that in Brazil, and that is something really unique. Being able to feel the fan and the country's energy behind you in your own sport. And that's something that's growing in America, but is still not quite the same.
I suppose then, obviously, you were in England. No, not in England, sorry. My bad. In Finland. I've got so much to say, it all just comes out in one, so I'm very, very sorry. But, in terms of you playing over in Finland, do you think there's ever a chance that there should be a women's Europa League or Conference League introduced? Because I think that it's a bit unfortunate to only have just the Women's Champions League.
Yeah, I definitely think some more opportunities is always great, especially to grow the women's program and make it deeper so that there is a little bit more of a pathway to get there. Because a lot of times it's like you have it or you don't. Because in the women's game, there's the top level and then there's no level. So I would say introducing those opportunities can be really helpful, but also being able to balance the players who are playing in it sometimes get a little burnt out because sometimes the players at that top level who are then playing in all these tournaments, uh, then on their breaks are playing with their national teams. So I know it's hard to pack everything in there at the same time.
And then Puerto Rico came up next. So another obscure country. I don't think I've ever spoke to anyone who's played in Puerto Rico, and I spoke to over 50 people. So that's quite something. But to leave Finland, what was that like? Was that the agent involved there? I mean, how did you get contacted by a team in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I think it was still quite some time before I ever used an agent. So I was still kind of networking on my own and uh, hearing from other people's experiences. After Finland, when I came back to the United States for the first time, that was a bit of that COVID time. So everything was a bit shut down. And when I was able to see, okay, what's opening up again, I just loved the idea of the facilities that were going to be at the Puerto Rico team and the training. I really enjoyed how seriously the coach wanted to develop players and grow that program. So that was a big draw for me. And then also coming from California, being in a bit of a colder place on the East Coast and then Finland, I was a little bit ready for that warm weather. And so I was going to play on an island. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that was quite the draw.
And what was it like then to be a professional in Puerto Rico? Because I know, the majority of professional footballers get treated well. Like I know in the UK, obviously they do and things like that. But in Puerto Rico, I have the ambition and the idea that you are probably treated like royalty.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of times the perception of the professional level doesn't necessarily match up most well. And I'll speak to the women's side because so many places don't have the resources that they need to sustain that professional level. I mean, in Puerto Rico, that was probably the hardest training I've ever gone through in my life. That coach, and I liked it. I'm that kind of player that I like being worked hard. I respect that. But it is difficult. We're training 2 times a day, every day, both day sessions on the pitch. And it takes a big toll on you. It's really hot there. And we did not have the medical resources or, these other things, the food necessarily supplied the way that they did in college and things. So it was an adjustment. And you start realizing how much of a business that is and how much, again, you have to take care of yourself because at that college level in America, you're kind of given a lot of resources and you have to push yourself, but you're a little bit more taken care of than at that professional level. It's like you take care of yourself.
And I believe you scored a brace in a cup final. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah. In Puerto Rico specifically, I loved the culture. I loved the ambiance. My team had a bit of a target on its back. We were going through quite the winning streak. And so we were the team to beat. And as much as, I love that underdog feeling going in a game, And that's a difficult component. It's difficult to be on top and try to stay on top when you are the team to take down. And so being able to go out there and, be the contributor to my team in that way and be able to score a game that helps define the game in the championship is an amazing feeling.
And then you moved to probably the biggest club in Brazil, Santos, after 2 years in Puerto Rico. So again, how did you say goodbye to your, I suppose now, family in the country?
Yeah, that was difficult. Puerto Rico will always have a very special place in my heart. And, you really grow into the lifestyle there and the people. But at the same time, I had to reflect on, have I outgrown the game? And I think it was ready for me to experience something else within the world of soccer. And that is what Brazil was going to provide me, was a whole other challenge for myself. And although I loved Puerto Rico, I was kind of ready for another challenge. I felt like I had grown to the most potential I could have within that island. So it was just time for me to move on, as hard as it was.
I mean, it can't have been that hard to move on to Santos. I mean, what a club that is over in Brazil.
Yeah, no, that was a phenomenal opportunity. And from the moment I knew that it was an opportunity I could take, I felt very honored, and I knew what it meant to wear that jersey. Is I actually, you know what? I knew what it might have meant, but I think that you can't really prepare yourself until you're there, what it really means. Being in the streets, seeing that the fan base, the stadium, the heart of football in Brazil is pretty unique to experience.
And what was the best experience you had over in Brazil in terms of the people that came to watch you, capacity wise, or just an overall experience?
Yeah, a pretty defining moment for me when I was there. I have to mention first, I knew I was going to be playing on a team with one of my childhood idols. I have Brazilian family, so I always watched the Brazilian national team. And there's a player, Cristiane Rosa, and I had watched her my whole life on the screen. So that was already going to be a big moment. But a pretty defining moment for me was being able to score my first goal when I was there, because there's so much pressure on you and what you're going to bring to the team, being a new player, wearing that jersey. And so scoring in the Brasileiro League for the first time was a pretty dramatic shift. I started to realize, oh, wow, this is not just a normal goal I just scored. This means a lot more.
And how many people do you remember in the biggest attendance that you played in Brazil? Because I know whatever you have in England, for example, in Brazil it's times by 100.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's, even though it's on the women's side, football is the heart of that country, and so you get a lot of viewers, and a lot of people talking about it. That was all pretty new to me, to be walking around the streets and hear people talking about the game that you just played in, and Corinthians is another big club there. And so our games versus the Corinthians, I drew I would say a good amount of fans. I would say probably one of our games with them probably drew about 15,000. Could have filled that college stadium that I played in
Yes, for sure.
some time ago.
For sure. But you were the first American to score in the Brazilian Women's Championship. So you made history in that department as well.
Yeah. And that was something I didn't even know was a record that could be, broken, or that I could take. And I think that speaks to the few amount of Americans that really go down there and play, which is something that surprised me, because they have such an established league that is so followed. But I would just say that it takes a lot to adjust to that culture down there, and that because of the talent pool that they have, they don't often look for players outside of the country itself.
Because I know I spoke to Hamid Babali. Weirdly enough, he's played in Brazil. He's actually based in California, so ironically
Oh.
enough. But I know that he was in Brazil, not at the top tier, but he said there was quite a lot of corruption that happened behind the scenes. But I suppose playing for Santos, arguably the biggest club in Brazil, there wouldn't have been too much corruption or anything like that, match fixing or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I would say no, but also, they have their fair share of scandals. I think when you're a club that's that big with that many eyes on you, and also you can really touch so many people around the world, it comes with a big risk. And there were scandals on the men's side when I was there with things like that, fixing games, and but in the end, I think that when you're a club that's that big, you're going to get that scrutiny, whether the scandals are true or not. But for the most part, they handled it well. But even on the women's side, you have your fair share of, it's a tough sport. It's a tough industry, in terms of your commission or your coaching staff and the turnover there. So if you're winning, everyone's happy. If you're even tying and you're at Santos, things have to change. So it's intense.
I know obviously Neymar went back to Brazil not long ago. So I suppose and I know you met him, and I did see on social media that you met him. So what was that like then to meet such a Brazilian figure face of the sport?
Yeah, I think, Neymar being there and meeting him really showed me that the weight that club has on the game itself. Pele played there, and Marta has played there, and these are, soccer icons that anyone who is around the sport can look up to. So even just meeting him puts that in perspective of, wow, this is where I am and this is where I'm playing. And, you talk about sometimes anyone at any level having that imposter syndrome. And so it's a little bit like grounding to be able to see someone like that and meet them and then be so friendly, and to be like, wow, and I'm here standing next to them. So it's a pretty surreal thing.
Within the year, you moved to Whitecaps over in Canada. So I suppose then Santos came to an end pretty quickly. So was your contract expiring, or was it just a termination to leave?
Yeah, I spent a whole year in Brazil. And again, I think the culture shock and it being so disconnected, I think, from at least my home country of America, made it so I was ready to experience something a little bit closer. I didn't want to jump back into another team in Brazil and spend that many years away, because in the end, you're sacrificing a lot. In Brazil, the sport is year round. So, I got there in January and I left in December, and I had about a week off in the summer. So I think it was one of the biggest decisions I made in my professional career at that point of, what do you do when you're finding success at such a high level? But, it's incredibly consuming. And that can be a good thing. And that can also come with a lot of sacrifice. So I was kind of ready to reevaluate that and not jump back in. And that's kind of when I decided to come home and look for that other opportunity, which led me to the Vancouver Whitecaps.
So what was Canada like then? I suppose it's pretty similar to America. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, at least as opposed to Puerto Rico, Brazil, and Finland, it was like, wow, I'm almost home. There are some pretty stark differences at the same time, but I was in the same time zone. I was living in Vancouver, so that's like straight up above California, a few states, but same time zone. And so I was able to feel more in reach of that kind of life that I, had when I was growing up for the first time in a really long time.
And I know you signed there in July. So what was that like then to adjust to Canada? Because as you said, I mean, it's probably a bit colder than California. Is that right?
Yeah, it is a bit colder. I was lucky that I did experience their more mild seasons, and being on the coast of Canada, it's a little bit more moderate than the middle of Canada, which is going to be negative degree temperatures. But it was still quite the adjustment, because I was coming in at the end of their regular season and preparing for a pretty big international tournament. So that was super fast paced adjustment period time.
And what was the best part of your time at the Whitecaps?
Yeah, that's a tough question. There were a lot of different elements to it. It was really amazing being able to experience the Women's Champions Cup. We were playing some of the best teams over in North and Central America, including like Club America down in Mexico City, or the San Diego Wave. So, I would be remiss to say that my favorite part was not being able, was probably experiencing playing some of those highest level teams like the San Diego Wave and Portland Thorns.
I know, for example, San Diego Wave has some really good players. They have some of the best players that the game could have, like Jourdan and everyone else. So in terms of playing against those sorts of players, what was that like?
Yeah. We played it. Naomi Girma was on San Diego Wave at the time, and Kaylin Sheridan, their goalkeeper. And, again, it reminds me of my answer even with Neymar, which I know Neymar is a little bit in a different universe of football, but still you look at who you're playing against and who you're sharing the field with. And it was a nice validation of where you've gotten yourself to, because there's a lot of self-doubt that can happen along your professional journey when it's just you and you're in just a performance judged sport 24/7. So it was an amazing experience to share the field with some of those players that you really respect their level of soccer.
I know for you now, you're not currently at a club, but you have said in previous interviews, like the one with Danny, that you would like to sort of stay in the game and talk to some more people. I suppose network. I know seasons across the world. Basically, there's football going on all the time. So, what would be next for you? Would you prefer to get back into football and play for a club, or would you like to go into like a mentoring or a coaching, or what's next?
Yeah, I would say right now I'm really looking at what opportunities are going to present themselves this year. I'm still working towards potentially playing another season, and I would just say that kind of being in this women's game, my standards for it have changed over the years, and where I would see myself and what leagues I want to be a part of, like your question earlier. And so that really has me not wanting to jump into the first thing that presents itself, but wait and really see what feels right and work on that other side of the sports industry at the same time. So, I think for me, that might be getting into some journalism and seeing what I can do there and having that complement my professional career.
So, in terms of going back into football, you'd only prepare yourself for 1, 2 more seasons at most. And also, currently, what is occupying your time? Are you looking to go into journalism tomorrow, for example, or are you taking some time off?
Yeah. I would say that, as you're staying in shape for being a professional player, it is incredibly time consuming, which is a difficult part of that decision, because you're staying at the best shape you can be in order to seize these opportunities as they come, while also preparing for a transition if you're not going to play anymore. And I would say, being in my mid-20s, I feel physically at some of the best I've felt in my life, especially as you've grown knowledge from all the different places you've played before. Um, so being able to capitalize on that and stay in shape is, a lot of it. And then also currently diving into journalism is what I'm doing. So um, already getting that ball rolling.
So, in terms of sports journalism, obviously, I'm guessing you'd want to do football, right? You wouldn't want to dive into basketball or the other boring sports, as I might call them.
Yeah, it's tough. You really want to lean into what you know. And I love the game of football. I love it worldwide. And I like being able to support the women's side of it too, especially as it grows in the United States. So it does seem like a pretty good starting point.
And in terms of what would you like to do in journalism? Is it articles? Is it, I suppose, reporting for an outlet? And also, how do you think you're going to make that possible?
Yeah. I grew up in Southern California, and I think that already will present itself a lot of opportunities in just terms of proximities to different stations and different networks. And so I really can see myself in more of a broadcasting or commentating role. And I think that that's what I'm going to lean into.
Well, best of luck with that. But before we end the interview, I just wanted to, we always do it here on the channel. We build you a FIFA card, like EAFC, the video game that everyone seems to play apart from me now. But do you play it?
I don't currently play FIFA. I've had friends who have been awfully into FIFA, so I'm familiar, but don't play it myself.
I try and stay a bit far away from it as best as I can,
Yeah.
because I'm not very good. But that's not the reason why, I can assure
Yeah.
you. So what would your pace be then on EAFC?
For pace, I would say that is definitely a part of my game. So maybe like 80, 82.
Let's do 82. Let's boost your card up. I
Okay.
always love, you know what it is? People come on here and they say, oh, 70, or no, 79. I'm like, go for the 79,
Okay.
boost the card up a
All
bit
right.
more.
82
Uh,
it is.
okay, shooting as a striker, what would that be?
It's funny because you say as a striker, and now I mean, in Vancouver playing against the Wave and Portland Thorns, I was a bit moved to outside defense. So my card might throw some people off. I would say I would put my shooting a little lower at like 65.
65, okay. Passing, what would that be?
My passing is quite strong, so I would give that one an 80.
80. Dribbling, there's 3 more left. What would you give your dribbling?
My dribbling, again, I do see myself as a bit more of a passing player than dribbling, so I'm gonna go with like 66.
66. There's two more. You've got defending and physicality. I suppose they sort of go hand in hand. What would your defending be on the game?
I'm going to lift the defending up. I know the central attacker might shock some people, but I'm going to give it like an 83.
83. And last but not least, you have physicality. What would that be?
I'll give my physicality an 80 as well.
80. Jourdan, what an absolute pleasure it's been speaking about your career in 5 different countries, including Puerto Rico, Finland, and America, Canada, and of course Brazil. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It was great to be here.